The bullies tried to humiliate a fragile girl. Little did they know she was a black belt. Emily Johnson walked with her head down across the courtyard of Lincoln Heights High School in Boston, carrying her heavy backpack and trying to go unnoticed among the groups of students. At 16, her slender frame and shy demeanor made her an easy target for those looking for fun at others' expense. That's when Tyler Williams, the principal's son and undisputed leader of the most popular crowd, spotted the girl trying to hide behind the trees in the yard. With a malicious grin, he signaled to his friends Mason, Ryan, and Jake, who immediately understood and formed a semicircle around Emily. "Hey, Snowflake, where do you think you're going?" Tyler shouted, using the cruel nickname he'd made up for her. Emily's heart raced, but she kept her eyes fixed on the ground. She knew any reaction would only make things worse. The four boys closed in, completely blocking her path. "What's the matter, Emily? Not gonna say hi?" Mason asked, feigning exaggerated politeness that drew laughter from the others. "Let me see what's in that backpack," Ryan said, reaching for her school supplies. "Please, I just want to go," Emily murmured, trying to step around them, but Tyler moved to block her. "Hold on, Princess. We just want to chat a little." Tyler grabbed one of the notebooks that had fallen from her half-open bag and flipped through it. Wow, such neat handwriting. Too bad it's loser handwriting. Without warning, he threw the notebook on the ground and stomped on it, leaving the mark of his boot on the cover. Emily quickly bent down to gather her things, but Jake kicked another book away. "Oops, slipped," he said, provoking more laughter. On the other side of the fence, separating the school from the street, Margaret Johnson watched the whole scene with a broken heart. At 72, she had raised Emily since she was 5, when her daughter Sarah had passed away in a car accident. The promise she'd made in the hospital echoed in her mind every day, to protect her granddaughter from all the world's evils. But there, watching those boys humiliate her girl, Margaret felt utterly powerless. Her wrinkled hands tightened around the fence as silent tears streamed down her time-worn face. Emily finished gathering her things in silence, stood up, and tried once more to move past the group. But Tyler wasn't satisfied. "What's the rush?" He stepped right in front of her, forcing Emily to look up for the first time. "You think you're better than us just because you get good grades?" "I don't think anything," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "I just want to leave." But we're not done talking. Ryan moved in from behind, making her feel even more cornered. That's when the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. The four boys exchanged glances, and Tyler shrugged. "Too bad. Our little friend has to get to class." He stepped back, but not before whispering in Emily's ear, "This isn't over, got it?" Emily practically ran to class, her heart still pounding unevenly. She took her seat at the back of the room and tried to focus on Miss Jennifer's lecture on American literature, but her mind couldn't shake Tyler's menacing glare. During gym class, Coach Mark Thompson noticed Emily seemed more withdrawn than usual. She'd always been quiet, but today there was something different in her demeanor. When he approached to ask if she was okay, she just shook her head and murmured that she had a headache. Mark knew something wasn't right. In her 15 years of teaching, she had developed a sixth sense for identifying when a student was going through difficulties. But before she could investigate further, she was called by Principal Richard Williams for a conversation in his office. "Mark, I need to talk to you about some comments that have reached my ears," said the principal, a middle-aged man with an always serious expression. "It seems you've been getting too involved in the students' personal problems." "Principal, it's part of my job to care about the students' well-being," replied Mark, not understanding where the conversation was heading. "I get that, but there are certain situations it's better not to meddle in, especially when they involve specific students." Richard's tone grew firmer. "I hope you understand." Mark understood the underlying message perfectly. There were suspicions about Tyler's behavior, but since he was the principal's son, any intervention would be seen as trouble. With a heavy heart, the teacher nodded and left the room, frustrated that he couldn't help his students the way he wanted. Meanwhile, outside the school, Mrs. Margaret Johnson waited anxiously for her granddaughter. When Emily appeared at the gate, her grandmother immediately noticed something was wrong. Her blouse was slightly torn at the side, and there was a dirt stain on her uniform. "Sweetheart, "What happened to your clothes?" Mrs. Johnson asked, gently touching the torn fabric. "It was nothing, Grandma. I tripped on the court during gym class." Emily avoided eye contact, hating that she had to lie to the only person who truly cared about her. "Did you hurt yourself?" The concern in the older woman's voice was genuine. "No, just a little scratch. It's already gone." Mrs. Johnson wasn't convinced, but decided not to push further for now. On the way home, she discreetly observed her granddaughter's behavior. Emily walked with her head down, startling at any loud noise, and her eyes were red as if she'd been crying. The house they lived in the Riverside neighborhood, was simple but lovingly kept. Mrs. Johnson worked as a cleaner at an accounting firm to support the family, and even on a tight budget, she always managed to keep everything tidy and welcoming. "Go take a shower and rest, my dear," she said, stroking Emily's brown hair. "I'll make your favorite snack." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Mrs. Johnson stayed up late, listening to her granddaughter's restless sighs in the next room. Something was definitely happening at school, and she needed to find out what it was. The next day, she decided to arrive early to pick up Emily and observe the school environment more closely. What she saw worried her even more. Emily always left school alone, avoiding any contact with her classmates. There was a group of 4 boys who seemed to watch her every move, and Mrs. Johnson didn't like the look on their faces at all. Tyler and his friends had found out where Emily lived through malicious gossip from other students. The fact that she lived only with her grandmother in a modest house in the neighborhood fueled even more mockery. "Look at this, guys," Mason said during recess, pointing at Emily, who sat alone under a tree. "The little princess doesn't even have a mom or dad, just her senile grandma to take care of her." "That's why she's so weird," Ryan commented. "Probably raised old-fashioned, so she doesn't know how to handle herself." Tyler smirked mischievously. That information opened up even more interesting possibilities for their entertainment. He knew his position as the principal's son gave him special protection, and he intended to use it to the fullest. "How about we swing by her place after school?" he suggested, "just to meet the famous grandma." The idea was met with enthusiasm by the other 3. They began discreetly following Emily after classes, keeping enough distance to avoid being noticed by her, but staying close enough to find out exactly where she lived. During these pursuits, they started shouting insults about her family, always careful not to be seen by adults. Cruel words about her humble background, about being raised by an old lady, about having no parents to defend her. Each comment was like a dagger to Emily's heart, and she quickened her pace, trying to escape the voices echoing behind her. For weeks, she endured this routine of humiliation in silence. She came home with her uniform increasingly damaged, sometimes her backpack torn, other times her blouse dirty, always making excuses about falls and accidents during playtime. Mrs. Margaret could clearly see that her granddaughter's accidents were becoming too frequent to be coincidental. The emotional wounds were even more evident than the physical ones. Emily, who had always been quiet, was becoming completely withdrawn. She stopped talking about her day at school, stopped commenting on teachers or classmates, and even stopped complaining about homework. "Emily, sweetheart, you need to tell me what's going on," Mrs. Margaret said one afternoon, after finding another torn notebook in her granddaughter's backpack. "I know something isn't right at school." "It's nothing, Grandma. I already told you I was clumsy and dropped it." Emily avoided her grandmother's gaze, focusing on organizing her school supplies. "My dear, I may be old, but I'm not a fool." Mrs. Margaret sat on the bed beside her. "Your mother had the same look when she was hiding something. Tell Grandma what's hurting you inside." Emily felt her throat tighten. More than anything, she wanted to throw herself into her grandmother's arms and tell her everything. But the memory of Tyler's threats stopped her. He had made it very clear that if she told anyone, the consequences would be much worse. "Grandma, I promise it's nothing serious, just silly teenage stuff." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't need to worry about me." Mrs. Margaret knew her granddaughter was lying, but she also sensed that pushing too hard might push her further away. She decided on a different approach. She began discreetly observing the school and investigating on her own. That's how she found out where Tyler lived and who his parents were. The Williams family lived in one of the most beautiful houses in Beacon Hill, and Richard Williams had a solid reputation as an educator. Mrs. Margaret was puzzled by the possibility that the principal's son could be causing trouble at school. She decided to talk to other mothers and grandmothers at the school gate, trying to gather information subtly. That's when she discovered something that worried her even more. Mrs. Margaret worked as a cleaner at Thompson Accounting Associates, which belonged to the father of Mason, one of Tyler's friends. The connection made her stomach churn. If the boys found out where she worked, they could use it against Emily in ways she didn't even want to imagine. And it didn't take long for that information to reach the wrong ears. Mason casually mentioned during a conversation at home that there was a girl at school whose grandmother worked at his father's company. When Mr. Robert Thompson heard the name Margaret Johnson, he immediately made the connection. "Do you know Mrs. Margaret's granddaughter?" he asked, without any ill intent. "She's an exemplary employee here at the company. She's been working with us for over 10 years. Mason smiled. That information was too valuable not to share with Tyler. The next day, he reported the discovery to the group, who received the news with great interest. "Perfect," said Tyler, his eyes gleaming with a malice that would frighten any adult. "Now we have a guarantee that our little friend will cooperate with us." The opportunity to use this information came sooner than they expected. The following week, during history class, their teacher Deborah announced a school-wide general knowledge competition for all sophomore classes. "The competition will have 3 rounds," she explained. "First round within each class, second round between the winners of each class, and the finals between the top 2 candidates from the entire school. The winner will represent our school at the state championship." Tyler was immediately interested in the competition. He considered himself smart and was used to being the center of attention. The idea of representing the school at a major event fed his ego. "Teacher, how will the selection work?" he asked, already picturing himself as the winner. "The first round will be next Friday. Each class will take a written test, and the top 3 scorers will advance to the second round," replied Mrs. Deborah. Emily listened to the announcement with genuine interest. She had always excelled in her studies, and general knowledge was one of her favorite subjects. Since she was little, Margaret had encouraged her to read everything she could get her hands on, from old newspapers to encyclopedias borrowed from the public library. In the week leading up to the competition, Emily devoted herself even more to her studies. It was one of the few things that distracted her from her troubles with Tyler and his group. Between the pages of books, she found a safe refuge where no one could humiliate her. Tyler, on the other hand, studied with the confidence of someone who had never faced real defeat. His friends treated him as if victory were already guaranteed, feeding his arrogance even further. "Dude, you're gonna crush everyone," said Ryan. "Especially that weird girl over there," he added, discreetly pointing at Emily. "Tell me about it," Tyler laughed. "It'll be pathetic watching her try to compete with me." On Friday, the day of the first round, the tension in the air was palpable. The test would be held in the school auditorium with all the sophomores gathered together. Emily sat in one of the front rows, trying to focus and ignore the mocking glances she felt on her back. The test began promptly at 2 in the afternoon. 40 multiple-choice questions covering history, geography, science, literature, and current events. Emily read each question carefully, feeling confident about most of the answers. Tyler, a few rows behind, also felt sure of himself, though some questions were harder than he expected. He looked around and saw several classmates with puzzled expressions, which boosted his confidence. An hour later, everyone turned in their tests. The results would be posted the following Monday during lunch break. Over the weekend, Emily tried not to think too much about the competition, but it was hard to contain her nerves. Margaret noticed her granddaughter seemed more excited than usual, giving her hope that maybe things at school were improving. On Monday, a crowd gathered around the bulletin board where the results would be posted. Mrs. Deborah arrived at exactly 10 in the morning and pinned the list to the board. The names were listed in order of ranking. The first place caused a murmur of surprise among the students. First place, Emily Johnson, 39 points. Second place, Tyler Williams, 35 points. Third place, Ashley Moore, 34 points. Tyler looked at the list 3 times before accepting what he was seeing. Emily had scored nearly perfectly, while he had come in second with a significant gap. The silence around him was deafening. His friends stared at him, waiting for a reaction, but Tyler was frozen by public humiliation. Never before had he been surpassed by someone he considered inferior. Emily, on the other hand, could hardly believe the result. She had won. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself. For a few minutes, she completely forgot about her troubles with the bullies and simply basked in the feeling of recognition for her hard work. "Congratulations, Emily," said Ashley Moore, one of the few classmates who had always treated her kindly. "You were amazing." "Thank you." Emily smiled timidly, still processing her victory. Teacher Deborah approached the group of finalists. "Congratulations to all 3 of you," she said. "The second round will be next Friday, and you'll compete against the top students from other classes. Prepare well." That was when Tyler finally reacted. His face was red with anger and humiliation. He strode toward Emily, completely ignoring the other students around them. "You thought you were being clever, huh?" he whispered low enough for only her to hear. "Took advantage of me not trying as hard as I could." Emily felt the familiar fear settling in her chest, but this time there was something different. Her victory had given her an unexpected dose of confidence. "I just answered the questions the best I could," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Oh, really?" Tyler smirked, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Well, I hope you enjoyed that little moment of glory. Because it won't last long." He walked away, giving an almost imperceptible signal to Mason, Ryan, and Jake. The 3 immediately understood. It was time to turn up the pressure on Emily. In the days that followed, the harassment became more systematic and cruel. They learned Emily's schedule, the routes she preferred, where she usually hid during breaks. It was as if they were studying their prey before the final strike. On Wednesday, Mason cornered Emily when she was alone near the restrooms. "Hey, Emily, did you know my dad knows your grandma?" he said with fake casualness. Emily's blood ran cold. She stopped walking and slowly turned to face him. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Oh, you didn't know? Mrs. Margaret has worked at my dad's company for years, model employee, according to him." Mason grinned maliciously. "Would be a shame if something happened to her job, right?" Emily's legs nearly gave out. Her grandmother's job was all they had. Without it, they wouldn't be able to pay rent, buy food, or afford her clothes and school supplies. "Now you understand the situation," Mason continued. "If you tell anyone about our little games, I'll have a little chat with my dad. And you know how bosses are when they find out employees are causing trouble, don't you?" Emily couldn't answer. The lump in her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "Good, we're on the same page." Mason patted her shoulder lightly before walking away. "Oh, and good luck in the competition on Friday. You'll need it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Emily could barely eat dinner. Mrs. Johnson noticed something was even more off than usual, but every attempt to talk was met with one-word answers. "Sweetheart, you've gotten so thin," her grandmother said, gently touching her granddaughter's face. "And those dark circles. Are you not sleeping well?" "I'm fine, Grandma. It's just school stress." Emily forced a weak smile. "Emily, you know you can tell me anything, right?" Mrs. Johnson sat beside her at the small kitchen table. "No matter what it is, we'll always figure it out together." For a moment, Emily almost gave in. She almost told her about the humiliation, the threats, the constant fear she felt. But then she remembered Mason's words and imagined her grandmother losing her job because of her. "I know, Grandma. Oh. But really, everything's okay." Mrs. Johnson sighed, realizing she couldn't break through the wall her granddaughter had built. She decided it was time to take more direct action. On Thursday morning, while Emily was at school, Mrs. Johnson missed work for the first time in 3 years. She knew it might cause trouble, but her concern for her granddaughter outweighed any professional consequences. She put on her best clothes and headed to Beacon Hill, where the Williams family lived. She had gotten their address from other school staff and was determined to speak directly with Tyler's parents. The Williams house was imposing, with a well-kept garden and an iron gate that reflected the family's status. Mrs. Johnson took a deep breath and rang the bell. Catherine Williams, Tyler's mother and the principal's wife, answered. She was an elegant, middle-aged woman, dressed in expensive clothes, with an air of superiority she didn't even try to hide. "Yes," she said, looking Mrs. Johnson up and down with clear disdain. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Margaret Johnson. I needed to speak with you about your son, Tyler, and my granddaughter, Emily." Catherine narrowed her eyes. She had no idea what this humble woman wanted, but she already disliked the situation. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about, and my son's name is Tyler, not grandson." Mrs. Johnson realized the misunderstanding and quickly corrected herself. "My apologies, ma'am. I meant your son Tyler and my granddaughter Emily. They go to the same school." "And what do you want?" Catherine crossed her arms, clearly impatient. "I believe there may be some issues between them at school. My granddaughter has been coming home very upset, and I'd like to talk so we can resolve this the best way possible." Catherine laughed scornfully. "Look, I don't know what kind of stories your granddaughter is making up, but my son is a model student. If she's having problems, maybe she should look for the cause somewhere else. Ma'am, I'm not accusing anyone." Mrs. Johnson tried to stay calm. "I just want to understand what's happening so we can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," Catherine began, closing the gate. "And next time think twice before coming here to accuse my son of something. People like you should know your place." The door slammed shut, leaving Mrs. Johnson alone on the sidewalk. The tears she had held back during the conversation finally streamed down her face. The humiliation had been complete and devastating. She returned home heartbroken, feeling more powerless than ever. How could she protect her granddaughter if she couldn't even have a civil conversation with the Bullies' parents? That afternoon, when Emily came home from school, Mrs. Johnson decided not to mention her failed attempt to resolve the situation. She didn't want to add more weight to her granddaughter's already burdened shoulders. But Emily noticed something was different. Her grandmother seemed more downcast than usual, and there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked, noticing the elderly woman's trembling hands as she prepared dinner. "Of course, dear, just a little tired from work," Mrs. Johnson forced a smile. In truth, she was lying about two things. She hadn't gone to work that day, and she wasn't the least bit fine. The conversation with Catherine had been a punch to the gut, painfully reminding her of her place in the social hierarchy. Meanwhile, at the Williams house, Catherine told her husband about the presumptuous visit from a student's grandmother. Richard listened carefully, but part of him was unsettled. "Are you sure there wasn't any truth to what she was saying?" he asked. "Of course not," Catherine huffed indignantly. "Our Tyler is an angel. Those people always make up stories for attention." Richard didn't respond, but made a mental note to keep a closer eye on his son's behavior at school. As the principal, he knew appearances didn't always match reality. Friday arrived, bringing with it the second round of the school competition. Emily woke up with a knot in her stomach, not just from test anxiety, but mostly from what might happen afterward. Tyler had spent the entire week planning his revenge for the public humiliation he'd suffered. The thought of being outshone by Emily again was unbearable to him. "Today, she's going to learn her place," he told his friends during recess before the test. "What are you planning?" Ryan asked, curious. "You'll see," Tyler smirked. "After the test, when everyone's gone, we're going to have a little private chat with our dear friend." The second round of the competition took place in the same auditorium, but this time with only 6 contestants. Besides Emily and Tyler, there was Ashley Moore from their class and 3 other students from the B and C sections. This test was harder, with essay questions requiring deeper knowledge. Emily focused as hard as she could, trying to ignore the pressure from Tyler's hostile stares. 2 hours later, everyone turned in their tests. The results wouldn't be announced until Monday, and the 2 finalists would face off the following Wednesday. "Good luck, Emily. Ashley said as they left the auditorium. "Hope we meet in the finals." "Thanks, Ashley. You did great too." Tyler watched the exchange from a distance, his anger growing. Seeing Emily treated with respect by other classmates was unacceptable to him. When the school had officially emptied out, Tyler gave his friends the agreed-upon signal. It was time to put the plan into action. Emily had stayed late in the library, trying to finish a history assignment. When she finally left, the school was practically deserted, only a few janitors still moving through the halls. She headed to the girls' locker room to grab a jacket she'd left in her locker. It was a fatal mistake. As soon as she entered the locker room, the door clicked shut behind her with an ominous sound. When she turned, she saw Tyler, Mason, Ryan, and Jake blocking her only exit. "Alone at last," Tyler said with a grin that made Emily's blood run cold. "Now we can have our little chat without interruptions. Please, I just want to get my jacket and leave." Emily tried to keep her voice steady, but her hand trembled visibly. "Relax. We're in no hurry." Mason leaned against the door, making sure she couldn't escape. "You know, Emily, you've been causing us some trouble." Tyler began circling her like a predator closing in on its prey. "First with your habit of getting top grades, now with this ridiculous competition." "I didn't do anything wrong," she replied, trying to control the panic rising in her chest. "Nothing wrong?" Ryan laughed loudly. "You humiliated us in front of the whole school. That wasn't intentional. I just answered the test questions." "Oh, sure, you just answered the questions." Tyler stopped right in front of her, invading her personal space. "You really think you're better than us, don't you?" Emily stepped back until her shoulders hit the metal lockers. The sound echoed through the empty locker room, emphasizing how alone and vulnerable she was. "I never said that," she whispered. "You don't have to." Jake moved in from the side. "It's written all over your weird face." "You know what I think?" Tyler placed his hands on the lockers, one on each side of Emily's head, trapping her completely. "I think you need to learn a few lessons about humility." Then something strange happened. Instead of the paralyzing fear that usually took over in these situations, Emily felt an odd calm settle in her mind. It was as if a part of her, long dormant, was finally waking up. Her muscles relaxed, her breathing steadied, and her posture shifted subtly. Years of training she'd kept hidden began to surface in her muscle memory. "Are you even listening?" Tyler waved a hand in front of her face, annoyed by her lack of reaction. "I'm listening," Emily replied, and there was something different in her voice, a firmness that hadn't been there before. "Good, because now you're going to learn your place in this school." Tyler reached for her shoulder, intending to shove her against the lockers. What happened next was so fast, none of the four boys could process it immediately. In one fluid, precise motion, Emily dodged Tyler's touch, sidestepped, and, with flawless Aikido technique, used his own momentum against him. Tyler suddenly found himself off balance, stumbling forward and bracing against the lockers to avoid falling. His friends froze for a few seconds, baffled by what had just happened. "What the—" Ryan started, but was cut off when Mason decided to grab Emily. This time she was completely ready. With a smooth circular motion, she evaded Mason's lunge and applied an arm lock that spun him mid-air before he landed on the floor, more surprised than hurt. Jake and Ryan exchanged glances, torn between attacking or retreating. The fragile girl they'd bullied for months had transformed into something entirely different before their eyes. "How did you—" Jake began, but was interrupted when Tyler, furious and humiliated, charged at her again. "You witch!" he shouted, swinging his fists wildly. Emily took a deep breath. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she couldn't let this continue. With movements like a dance, she dodged Tyler's wild strikes and applied a restraining hold, leaving him on the floor with his arm bent at an angle that, while not injurious, was extremely uncomfortable. "Please, stop," she said, keeping Tyler pinned. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Ryan and Jake instinctively backed away. Emily's transformation was so complete, they barely recognized the timid girl they'd tormented for so long. "Who are you?" asked Ryan, his voice trembling. Emily released Tyler, who slowly got up, rubbing his sore arm. She positioned herself in the center of the locker room, keeping all four boys in her line of sight. I'm the same person you've been humiliating for months, she replied calmly. The difference is now you've found out I can defend myself. That's impossible. Mason stood up from the floor, still dazed. You can't know how to fight. You're just a what? Emily interrupted him, and for the first time in a long while there was real strength in her voice. A weak girl? A loser? A weirdo? Tyler, who had recovered from the initial shock, felt his anger overtake his surprise. Doesn't matter what tricks you know, he spat. You're still nothing, and if you tell anyone about this, your grandmother will pay the price. It was the wrong thing to say. The mention of her grandmother ignited something in Emily's eyes. In a move faster than any of the boys could follow, she was back in front of Tyler, this time with an expression that made them all step back. You'll leave my grandmother out of this, she said, her voice low but full of authority. And you'll stop bothering me now. Or what? Tyler tried to keep up his bravado, but fear flickered in his eyes. Or I'll show the whole school exactly what I'm capable of, Emily answered. And believe me, you won't want that. The silence that followed was broken by footsteps in the hallway. The 5 students froze, realizing someone was approaching. What's going on here? The voice of Mrs. Victoria, the school counselor, echoed from outside the locker room. Emily looked at the 4 boys who were clearly panicking. With a subtle gesture, she signaled for them to stay quiet. Nothing, ma'am, she called out. We were just talking. Victoria opened the locker room door and found the 5 students in seemingly normal positions. Tyler and his friends had managed to compose themselves quickly, though they were still visibly shaken. You know you're not supposed to be here after school hours, she said, frowning. Especially in the girls' locker room, boys. Sorry, ma'am, Tyler managed to say. We were just waiting for Emily to finish getting her things. Victoria eyed the group suspiciously, sensing something off in the air, but unable to pinpoint what. Well, now you'll all leave, immediately. The 5 students walked out of the locker room in silence. When they reached the courtyard, Tyler turned to Emily one last time. This isn't over, he whispered. I know, she replied calmly. And when you want to continue, you know where to find me. Tyler swallowed hard. There was something about Emily's posture that made him feel like the world had turned upside down. The fragile girl was gone completely, replaced by someone he didn't recognize or understand. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Emily came home with a strange mix of relief and worry. On one hand, she had finally stood up for herself and shown she wasn't the helpless victim everyone thought. On the other, she knew the consequences of this revelation could be unpredictable. Mrs. Margaret noticed immediately that something was different about her granddaughter. Emily stood taller, more confident, and there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for months. How was your test today, sweetheart? She asked, serving dinner. It went well, Grandma. I think I did better than in the first round, Emily replied, and Mrs. Johnson noticed it was the first time in a long while that she'd talked about school without seeming haunted. And after the test, did anything happen? Emily hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to tell her grandmother everything, but there was still fear of the consequences. Mrs. Johnson's job was still at risk, and she didn't know if the boys would follow through on their threats. No, nothing much. Just talked to some classmates. Mrs. Johnson wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to push. There was something positive in the change she saw in her granddaughter, and she didn't want to risk breaking this moment of progress. Meanwhile, at the Williams house, Tyler was having the worst night of his life. The humiliation in the locker room had been so complete that he was still processing what had happened. Tyler, are you okay? His mother asked during dinner. You haven't said a word since you got home. I'm fine, he replied curtly, pushing food around his plate without really eating. Richard watched his son carefully. As the principal, he'd developed a sharp eye for spotting when something was wrong with students, and Tyler's behavior set off all his alarms. Did something happen at school today, he asked. Tyler glanced up quickly, a flash of panic crossing his face before he regained control. No, Nothing important, just the competition test. How'd you do? Fine, I guess. Tyler stood abruptly. Can I go to my room? I'm tired. Richard and Catherine exchanged worried looks. Though Tyler could be moody sometimes, it was rare to see him so shaken. After their son left, Richard decided it was time to dig deeper into what was happening at school. The visit from Emily's grandmother, combined with Tyler's strange behavior, made him realize there might be more problems under his watch than he'd thought. On Saturday morning, Richard arrived at school early, before any other staff. He wanted to talk to some teachers and faculty to better understand the dynamics among the students. His first conversation was with Mark, the gym teacher, who had always shown concern for the students' well-being. "Mark, I need you to be completely honest with me," Richard said in his office. "Have you noticed any issues between the students, especially involving my son?" Mark hesitated. He'd picked up on several signs that something was wrong, but the principal's earlier warnings had discouraged him from getting involved. "Principal, he started cautiously. "Speak openly. I need to know the truth." "Well, I've noticed some students seem under pressure, especially Emily Johnson. She's always been quiet, but these past few months she seemed almost haunted." Richard felt a weight in his stomach. The name Emily Johnson was the same one the woman had mentioned when she visited his home. "What about my son? Have you noticed any inappropriate behavior?" Mark took a deep breath. It was a hard question to answer, honestly. "Principal, your son is popular and charismatic, but sometimes I see behavior that, well, isn't exactly friendly towards certain classmates." "What kind of behavior?" "Mocking comments, social exclusion, subtle intimidation, things that might not seem serious alone, but together create a very hostile environment for some students." Richard leaned back in his chair, processing the information. As a principal, he knew bullying among students was a serious issue many schools faced. As a father, it was painful to think his own son might be involved. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Mark looked at the floor, embarrassed. "Principal, you yourself told me not to get involved in certain situations. I took that as advice to stay away from problems involving Tyler." The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. His attempt to protect his son had inadvertently created an environment where problematic behaviors could flourish unchecked. "Mark, I made a serious mistake," he said slowly, "and I need to fix it. From now on, I want you to report any inappropriate behavior you observe to me, no matter who's involved." After speaking with Mark, Richard sought out Victoria, the academic coordinator, who had encountered the students in the locker room the previous Friday. "Victoria, about yesterday's incident in the locker room, did you get the sense there was more going on than met the eye?" "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone seemed on edge, especially the boys, and there was something about Emily's demeanor that was different. Different how? She seemed more confident, more assertive, completely unlike the shy girl I know, as if something had drastically changed in her personality. Richard mentally noted everything he was hearing. It was becoming clear there was a complex situation unfolding at his school, and he had been blind to it for far too long. Over the weekend, he decided to do something he'd never done before: discreetly observe student interactions through the school's security cameras. What he saw deeply disturbed him. There were hours of footage showing Tyler and his friends following Emily, making comments that clearly upset her, invading her personal space, and creating uncomfortable situations. The pattern was clear and systematic. What shocked him most was seeing how Emily had physically changed over the months. In the older recordings, she walked with her head held high and seemed more relaxed. Gradually, she became more hunched, more fearful, more isolated. It was evident his son was leading a campaign of systematic intimidation against a vulnerable classmate. On Monday, when the results of the competition's second round were announced, Richard was there to observe the students' reactions. Once again, Emily had placed first, this time by an even wider margin over the other competitors. Tyler had come in third, failing to even qualify for the finals. His reaction was immediate and concerning. Richard saw his son's face flush with anger, watched as he clenched his fists and whispered something to his friends, that was clearly not congratulations. Emily, on the other hand, received the news with a calm that completely contrasted her earlier anxiety. There was a serenity in her posture that caught the attention of several teachers. "Congratulations, Emily," said Miss Deborah. "You'll represent our school in the state finals. It's a well-deserved honor." "Thank you, Miss Deborah. I'll do my best to represent the school well." Richard observed the entire interaction from a distance, noticing how other students seemed genuinely happy for Emily's success, while Tyler and his friends radiated hostility. During recess, he made a decision he knew was necessary, though painful. He would have a serious talk with his son. "Tyler, come to my office, please," he said when he found his son in the hallway. Tyler reluctantly obeyed, already suspecting the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "Sit down." Richard closed the door and assumed a formal tone. "We need to talk about your behavior at school." "My behavior?" Tyler tried to sound innocent. "What about my behavior?" "Don't lie to me, Tyler. I know about the bullying you and your friends have been doing to Emily Johnson." Tyler Williams's face went pale. He hadn't expected his father to know specific details. "Dad, it's not really like that." "I've seen the security footage," Richard interrupted him. "Weeks of recordings showing you harassing, humiliating, and intimidating a classmate. Do you have any explanation for this?" Tyler stayed silent, knowing any excuse he made would easily be disproven by the evidence. "I'm deeply disappointed in you," Richard continued, "not just as the principal of this school, but as your father. I didn't raise you to be a bully." "Dad, you don't understand," Tyler finally spoke. "She always acted like she was better than everyone, with her perfect grades, her competitions, and that gives you the right to psychologically torment a classmate?" Richard stood up, clearly angry. "Tyler, bullying is a crime. Are you aware of that?" The word crime made Tyler swallow hard. He'd thought of his actions as jokes, as a way to put Emily in her place. He'd never considered the legal implications. "What's going to happen to me?" he asked in a small voice. "First, you'll apologize to Emily, publicly. Second, you'll attend counseling sessions to understand the severity of your actions. Third, any repeat of this behavior will result in suspension and possible expulsion." Tyler knew there was no room for negotiation. His father was speaking both as a principal and as a father, and both were equally disappointed. "And there's one more thing," Richard added. "I'll personally speak to Emily's grandmother to apologize for the school's failure, including my own, to protect a student." Meanwhile, across town, Margaret Johnson was at work when she received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Richard Williams, principal of the school your granddaughter attends. Would you have time to meet this afternoon?" Margaret's heart raced. A call from the principal could only mean trouble. "Of course, Principal Williams. Has something happened to Emily?" "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Could you come to the school around 5? "Yes, I can. Is my granddaughter all right?" "She's fine, Mrs. Johnson. We just need to talk about some concerns regarding the school environment." Margaret spent the rest of the day anxious, wondering what could have happened. Had Emily gotten into trouble? Had her grades slipped? 1,000 possibilities ran through her mind. At exactly 5 o'clock, she stood at the school gates wearing her best outfit and trying to steady her nerves. Richard greeted her personally, which only made her more uneasy. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for coming," he said with a warmth she hadn't expected. "Please, let's go to my office." Once seated, Richard took a deep breath before speaking. "Mrs. Johnson, I asked you here to apologize. As the principal of this school, and as Tyler Williams's father." She blinked several times, confused. "Apologize? I don't understand, Principal Williams. Your granddaughter has been the victim of systematic bullying by my son and other students. I should have noticed it much sooner, and I failed in my responsibility to protect Emily." Margaret felt her legs go weak. All her suspicions were being confirmed at once. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "From the evidence I've gathered, at least 3 months, probably longer." Tears began rolling down the elderly woman's face. 3 months of suffering her granddaughter had kept to herself. 3 months of silent pain she had sensed, but couldn't ease. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, "but Emily didn't want to tell me. She kept saying everything was fine." "Mrs. Johnson, I understand this is very difficult for you, but I want you to know I'm taking serious steps to address this." Tyler leaned forward, showing sincerity. "The students involved will be properly disciplined, and we're implementing a stricter anti-bullying program." "And what happened that made you find out? Did Emily finally tell you?" Tyler hesitated. He knew about the locker room incident, but didn't have all the details. "There was a situation on Friday that caught our attention. We're still investigating exactly what happened, but it led me to look closer at the students' interactions." Mrs. Johnson nodded, trying to process everything. "Principal, there's something I need to tell you. Last week I went to your son's family's house to talk about the issues between him and my granddaughter." Tyler straightened in his chair. "You spoke to my wife?" "I tried to, but she wouldn't listen. She sent me away, saying I should know my place." The anger that flashed across Tyler's face was unmistakable. He was already dealing with disappointment over his son's behavior, and now he learned his wife had been rude and prejudiced toward the grandmother of a bullying victim. "Mrs. Johnson, I deeply apologize for my wife's behavior. That was completely unacceptable. I just wanted to resolve this the best way possible," she said, wiping her tears. "My granddaughter is all I have in the world. I understand, and you did the right thing by trying to find a solution. I should have looked into it when you first came to me, through my wife." Just then there was a knock at the door. It was Victoria, the coordinator. "Sorry to interrupt, Principal, but I need to speak with you about something we discovered today." "Go ahead, Mrs. Johnson is here precisely because of the issues we're investigating." Victoria stepped fully into the room and closed the door. "After speaking with some custodial staff, we found the problems were even more widespread than we thought. They reported seeing multiple bullying incidents that weren't reported before, out of fear of retaliation." "What kind of incidents?" Tyler asked. "Harassment after school, school supplies being deliberately damaged, humiliating comments made when no teachers were around. One of the workers said she often wanted to step in but was discouraged by others who said, 'It's not our problem.'" Mrs. Johnson felt each revelation like a blow to her heart. Imagining her granddaughter enduring all this alone was almost unbearable. "But there's more," Victoria continued. "The custodian who cleans the girls' locker room said she found strange signs there after Friday's incident. There were marks on the floor as if some kind of struggle or physical confrontation had happened." Tyler and Mrs. Johnson exchanged glances, both reaching the same disturbing conclusion. "Principal, I think we need to talk to Emily about what really happened on Friday," Victoria said. At that moment, as if the universe had orchestrated it, Emily appeared at the office door. She had come to retrieve some forgotten books and saw her grandmother talking with the principal. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" she asked, clearly worried. Mrs. Johnson stood and rushed to hug her granddaughter, tears now flowing freely. "My dear, why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep all this to yourself?" Emily looked around the room, seeing the serious expressions on the principal and coordinator's faces, and realized her secrets had finally come to light. "Grandma, I didn't want to worry you," she said softly. "Emily." Richard stepped forward carefully. "Can you tell us what really happened in the locker room on Friday?" Emily hesitated, glancing at her grandmother. Margaret held her hands firmly. "You can tell us, sweetheart, don't be afraid." Taking a deep breath, Emily began recounting the events of that Friday. She told them about being cornered in the locker room, the threats, and how she had defended herself. "You defended yourself?" Victoria asked, confused. "How?" Emily looked at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. "I know martial arts," she said quietly. "I've been studying Aikido for over 10 years." The room fell completely silent. Richard, Victoria, and even Margaret stared at her in surprise. 10 years? Margaret asked. "But how? When?" "Remember Mr. Jenkins, Grandma, the man who lived on the back street and moved away last year? He was an Aikido master. When I was 6, he saw some older boys pushing me around at the park and offered to teach me how to defend myself." Margaret vaguely recalled the elderly man who always greeted Emily warmly whenever they met on the street. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. Because Mr. Jenkins said Aikido should only be used as a last resort, for real protection. He said if I told too many people, they might expect me to use it for every little problem, and that's not what martial arts are for. Richard was fascinated by the revelation. Everything made sense now. Emily's sudden confidence, how Tyler had been shaken, the signs of a physical altercation in the locker room. "Emily, did you hurt any of the boys?" Victoria asked, concerned about legal implications. "No, ma'am. Aikido teaches you to neutralize an attacker without causing injury. I just immobilize them until they stop trying to hurt me." "And how do you feel about what happened?" Richard asked. Emily thought for a moment before answering. "I feel relieved. For months I thought I had no choice but to accept what they did to me. Finding out I could protect myself was freeing." "But why did you endure it for so long? Why didn't you defend yourself sooner?" Margaret asked, still trying to make sense of everything. "Because they said if I told anyone, they'd make sure you lost your job. Mason told me his dad knows you from work and could make up any excuse to get you fired." Margaret's heart broke as she realized the sacrifice her granddaughter had made for her. Emily had endured months of psychological torment to protect the family's livelihood. "My dear, my job is never worth more than your safety and well-being," she said, hugging Emily tightly. "Never. Do you hear me?" Richard watched the interaction between grandmother and granddaughter with a mix of admiration and remorse. Emily's courage and maturity stood in painful contrast to his own son's cowardly and cruel behavior. "Emily, I want you to know those threats about your grandmother's job have no basis," he said firmly. "And even if they did, no job is worth more than your dignity and safety." Victoria, who had remained quiet during the conversation, finally spoke. "Principal, I think we need to completely rethink our bullying prevention and response protocol. This situation shows our current methods are completely inadequate." "I completely agree," Richard replied, "and Emily will be key in helping us understand how to improve. If she's willing, of course." Emily looked at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. "I want to help," she said. "If this can prevent other students from going through what I went through, I want to be part of the solution." At that moment, the pieces of a complex puzzle began falling into place in Richard's mind. He realized there were far more layers to this story than he had initially imagined. "Emily, may I ask you a personal question?" he said carefully. "Of course." "Why did your Aikido instructor decide to train you when you were so young? Martial arts teachers are usually cautious about teaching very small children." Emily exchanged a meaningful glance with her grandmother before answering. "He said he recognized something in me, a special need for protection. Later, when I was older, he told me he had trained my mother when she was young." Margaret nodded slowly. "Sarah, Emily's mother, was also bullied as a teenager," she explained. "Mr. Jenkins helped her back then, and when he saw that Emily might face the same thing, he offered to teach her too." The revelation added another emotional layer to the story. Emily wasn't just a random victim of bullying, she was reliving a pattern that had affected her family for generations. "This means the problem of bullying among young people isn't new," Victoria observed. "It's something that's been repeating itself over the years." "Exactly," Richard agreed, "and that makes it even more urgent for us to implement real, lasting changes." Just then, they were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Mark, the physical education teacher. "Sorry to interrupt, Principal, but I need to report something important that happened a few minutes ago." "Come in, Mark." "What happened?" "Tyler came to see me at the gym. He was visibly shaken and asked to talk. He ended up confessing to the whole bullying scheme against Emily and asked for guidance on how to make things right." Everyone in the room was surprised. It was unexpected for Tyler to take the initiative to confess and seek help. "What exactly did he say?" Richard asked. "He said he had realized the seriousness of his actions and that he was scared of the person he'd become. He admitted he started bullying Emily out of jealousy over her grades, but that things had escalated far beyond what he intended." Emily listened in silence. Part of her felt a bitter satisfaction knowing Tyler was finally facing the consequences of his actions. But another part of her, the part shaped by Mr. Jenkins' teachings on compassion and forgiveness, felt something different. Did he say anything else? She asked. Mark looked directly at her before answering. He said he wanted to apologize to you in person, but didn't know if he deserved your forgiveness, and that he was willing to accept any consequences, including changing schools if it would make you feel safer. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Everyone in the room was processing the complexity of the situation. Emily, Richard said gently, the decision about how to proceed with Tyler is partly yours. As the victim, your voice should be heard in the resolution process. Emily was quiet for a long moment, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months, especially the last few days. I want to talk to him, she finally said, but not alone, with all of you and my grandmother there. Are you sure, dear? Margaret asked, concerned. I am. Mr. Jenkins always taught me that true strength isn't about defeating an enemy, but about turning enemies into allies when possible. Maybe this is a chance to do that. The maturity and wisdom in Emily's words left all the adults in the room deeply impressed. At 16, she displayed a level of understanding about conflict and resolution that many adults never develop. I'll call Tyler then, Richard said, picking up the phone. 15 minutes later, Tyler entered the room with hesitant steps. His face was red and swollen, clear evidence he had been crying. When he saw Emily, he froze completely, as if he hadn't expected her to be there. Tyler, Richard said firmly, Emily asked to speak with you. Sit down. Tyler obeyed silently, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but not hostile. Tyler, Emily said calmly, look at me when I'm talking to you. He reluctantly raised his eyes and was struck by the serenity he saw on Emily's face. There was no anger or desire for revenge, just a quiet determination that unsettled him. I want you to understand something, she continued. What you did to me these past few months was cruel and traumatic. You used your social standing to torment someone you saw as weaker. That's unacceptable. Tyler nodded miserably, unable to speak. But, Emily went on, I also want you to understand that people can change. We all have the ability to become better than we were yesterday. Emily, Tyler tried to speak, but his voice failed. Let me finish, she said gently. You caused me a lot of pain, Tyler, but I won't let that pain turn me into a bitter or vengeful person, and I hope you won't let your guilt paralyze you completely. Tyler finally managed to lift his eyes and keep them fixed on hers. I'm sorry, he said, his voice choked. I'm more sorry than I can say. I have no excuse for what I did. You're right, you don't, Emily agreed. But that doesn't mean there can't be redemption. Margaret watched the interaction with a mix of pride and concern. Her granddaughter was showing extraordinary maturity, but she still feared all that generosity might be seen as weakness. What do you mean by redemption? Tyler asked hesitantly. I mean, you can choose to use this experience to become a better person. You can choose to be someone who protects the vulnerable instead of attacking them. Richard watched his son with a mix of hope and apprehension. This conversation could be a turning point in Tyler's life, but it depended on how he chose to respond. Emily, Tyler said, his voice steadier now, I know I don't deserve your kindness, but if you give me a chance, I promise I'll spend the rest of my time in school trying to make up for what I did. How? She asked directly. Tyler thought for a moment before answering. I want to help create a real anti-bullying program at school. I want to talk to other students about the dangers of intimidation, and I want to make sure no one else goes through what I put you through. What about your friends, Mason, Ryan, and Jake? Are they willing to make that change too? Tyler hesitated. He knew his friends had been shaken by recent events, but he wasn't sure how they'd react to actively opposing the behavior they'd once embraced. I don't know, he answered honestly, but I'll try to convince them, and if they won't change, then maybe it's time I found new friends. The response impressed everyone in the room. It showed Tyler was genuinely considering deep changes in his life, not just superficial ones. Good, Emily said. Then here's my offer. I accept your apology, but with conditions. What conditions? First, you'll attend counseling sessions to understand why you did what you did and how to avoid repeating those behaviors. First, you'll work with me on developing an anti-bullying program for the school. Second, At the first sign you've gone back to your old ways, our truce ends immediately. Tyler nodded vigorously. I accept all the conditions. And Emily, thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Tyler. The question is what you'll do with it. Victoria, who had silently observed the entire interaction, finally spoke. Principal, I believe we've witnessed something very special here. This conversation should be the model for how we handle conflicts at school. Richard agreed completely. The way Emily had handled the situation showed wisdom far beyond her years. Emily, I'd like to make you a proposal, he said. How would you feel about becoming our first student ambassador against bullying? It would be an official position, with real responsibilities and formal recognition. Emily looked at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. I accept, as long as Tyler also has an official role in the program. If he truly wants to make amends, he should have the chance to contribute actively. Emily's continued generosity left Tyler visibly moved. He stood up from his chair and hesitantly extended his hand to her. Partners, he asked. Emily looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it firmly. Partners, she confirmed, but remember, Tyler, trust has to be earned every day. When they left school that afternoon, Margaret and Emily walked in silence for a few minutes, both processing everything that had happened. My dear, Margaret finally said, I'm so proud of you. I can hardly find the words. Why, Grandma? For your courage, your wisdom, your compassion. You could have used your anger to seek revenge, but you chose to use your strength to build something better. Emily smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. That's what Mr. Jenkins taught me. He always said the real victory isn't in defeating your opponent, but in finding a solution where everyone can grow. And do you think Tyler can really change? Margaret asked, still a little skeptical. I don't know, Emily answered honestly, but I believe he deserves the chance to try. And if he doesn't, at least I'll know I did my part. In the weeks that followed, noticeable changes began happening at Lincoln Heights High School. Tyler kept his promises. He started regular counseling sessions, worked with Emily on developing the anti-bullying program, and gradually rebuilt his reputation through consistent actions. His old friends reacted differently. Mason, initially resistant, was gradually influenced by the genuine change he saw in Tyler and decided to join the bullying prevention efforts. Ryan took longer to accept the need for change, but eventually committed to the program too. Jake, unfortunately, couldn't adjust to the new dynamic and drifted away from the group, though he stopped his bullying behavior. The most remarkable transformation was in Emily herself. Free from the constant weight of intimidation, she flourished in ways that even surprised her grandmother. Her confidence grew not just in academics, where she had always excelled, but also in social interactions. She led workshops on bullying prevention, shared her story with other classes, and became a respected voice in the school community. Her compassionate yet firm approach to conflict resolution became a model for other students. The state general knowledge competition took place 2 weeks after all these events. Emily represented her school with distinction, placing second among over 100 participants from across the state. But for her, the greatest victory had already happened within the walls of her own school. Tyler was in the audience on the day of the competition, genuinely cheering for Emily. When she stepped onto the podium to receive her second-place medal, he was one of the loudest applauding. After the ceremony, as they were heading home on the school bus, Tyler sat next to Emily. Congratulations, he said sincerely. You were amazing out there. Thank you, she replied, and thank you for being there to cheer for me. It meant a lot. Emily, can I ask you something? Of course. That Friday in the locker room when you defended yourself, you could have seriously hurt me if you wanted to, couldn't you? Emily considered the question carefully before answering. Probably, yes, but that was never the point. Aikido taught me that true strength lies in using only the power needed to protect yourself, never more than that. Why didn't you ever tell me you knew how to fight? If I'd known, I never would have. Tyler, she gently interrupted him, you shouldn't stop bullying someone just because you found out they can defend themselves. You should stop because it's the right thing to do. The remark made Tyler reflect deeply. He realized there were still layers in his understanding of respect and empathy that he needed to explore. "You're right," he finally said. "I still have a lot to learn." "We all do," Emily smiled. "The difference is being willing to learn." 6 months after the events in the locker room, Lincoln Heights High School had become a model for other institutions in bullying prevention and intervention. The program developed by Emily and Tyler had been so successful that schools from across the region came to visit and learn about their techniques. Margaret, who had kept her job and even received a promotion when her granddaughter's story became known in the community, watched with growing pride as Emily transformed into a natural leader. "My dear," she said one evening during dinner, "your mother would be so proud of you. Do you think she'd approve of the choices I made, especially forgiving Tyler and working with him?" Margaret smiled, remembering the daughter she had lost years before. "Your mother always believed in the power of compassion. She'd say you found a way to be strong without becoming hard, courageous without seeking revenge. And Mr. Jenkins? Would he approve too? I'm sure he would. You've applied all his teachings in the purest way possible." That night, Emily received an unexpected call. It was Tyler. "Emily, do you have a minute?" he asked, sounding a little nervous. "Sure. What's up?" "Nothing bad. Actually, it's something good. Remember how I mentioned I was thinking about continuing anti-bullying work after graduation?" "I do." "Well, I got an offer to give talks at other schools during summer break, and they said they wanted it to be a duo presentation with you and me." Emily was surprised. The idea of expanding their work beyond their own school was exciting. "That sounds amazing, Tyler. How many schools?" 15 in the Boston metro area. It'd be paid and they'd cover all expenses. More importantly, it'd be a chance to help so many other students. "I'm in," Emily said without hesitation. "But I have one condition." Tyler laughed, already used to Emily's conditions. "What is it?" "We need to make sure our message is consistent. It's not just about stopping bullying. It's about building more empathetic and inclusive school communities." "I completely agree. And Emily?" "Yeah? Thank you for continuing to believe in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what partners are for," she replied, "to remind us who we can become when we forget." During the following summer, Emily and Tyler visited the 15 schools as planned. Their talks became highly anticipated events, not just by students, but also by teachers and parents. The power of their message came from the authenticity of their experiences. Tyler spoke honestly about how bullying had corrupted his personality and relationships. Emily shared the pain of being a victim, but also the discovery of her own strength. Together, they showed that it was possible to break cycles of violence and create something positive from negative experiences. At one of the schools they visited, after a particularly emotional presentation, a girl about 15 years old approached them. "I wanted to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You gave me hope that things can get better." "How so?" Emily asked gently. "I'm going through something similar to what you went through. There's a group of girls in my class who, well, you know, but hearing that you not only got through it, but worked together to help others, it makes me believe I can find a way to improve my situation too." Tyler and Emily exchanged a meaningful look. This was exactly the kind of impact they hoped to have. "You're not alone," Emily said, handing her a card with their contact information. "And remember, you're stronger than you think, and you deserve to be treated with respect." "And," Tyler added, "if you ever need someone to talk to about strategies to handle the situation, we're here to help." When they got home that day, Emily and Tyler reflected on how far they'd come since that traumatic day in the locker room. "You know," Tyler said, "sometimes I think about how different things would be if you had reacted with anger that day, if you had given me a taste of my own medicine." "How so?" "Well, you could have used your skills to humiliate me publicly. You could have told everyone how I was just a coward who only knew how to pick on people I thought were weaker. You could have sought revenge." Emily considered his words. "Would that have solved anything? Would you have learned a real lesson or just grown more resentful?" "Probably more resentful," Tyler admitted. "And maybe I would have found other ways to cause trouble." "Exactly. Revenge might bring momentary satisfaction, but it rarely creates lasting change. Compassion and accountability are far more powerful in the long run. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Richard Williams. The school had received a proposal for Emily and Tyler to participate in a documentary about bullying prevention that would be broadcast nationwide. "It's an incredible opportunity," he explained. "You could take your message to millions of young people across the country." Emily and Tyler looked at each other, both recognizing the magnitude of the opportunity. "We need to talk about this," Emily said. "It's a big responsibility." "Of course, take the time you need, but think about the impact you could have." That night, Emily talked at length with her grandmother about the proposal. "What do you think, Grandma? It's an amazing opportunity, but it also scares me a little." Margaret Johnson, now 73 but still sharp-minded, considered the question carefully. "My dear, do you remember what your mother used to say about opportunities? That they come with responsibility? Exactly. And do you feel ready for that responsibility?" Emily thought about all the changes she'd experienced over the past year. From the frightened, isolated girl she had been 12 months earlier to the confident, compassionate young woman she had become. "I think so, but I don't want to do this alone. Tyler needs to be truly committed, because if our partnership fails on a national level, a lot of people could get hurt. Then talk to him, honestly, and see if you're both ready to take this step together." The next day, Emily and Tyler met at the park where she used to study when she wanted to escape school pressure. "Tyler, before we decide about the documentary, I need to ask you some tough questions." "Go ahead." "Have you really changed, or did you just learn to act differently?" she asked directly. Tyler took a deep breath. It was a question he knew would come eventually. "At first, I think it was just an act. I was trying to please my dad, trying to fix my reputation. But over the months, especially working with you and seeing the real impact of what we've done, I think the change became real." "How can you be sure?" "Because now when I see bullying situations, my first reaction isn't indifference or amusement anymore. It's anger. And when I see someone standing up for others like you did, my first reaction is admiration, not envy." Emily studied his face carefully, looking for signs of insincerity. She found none. "And if in the future you find yourself in a situation where bullying someone would be socially advantageous, where everyone expected you to do it, I hope I'll have the courage to do the right thing, and if I don't, I hope you'll be there to remind me of who I chose to become." The answer satisfied Emily. She had learned to recognize genuine honesty, and Tyler was being genuine. "All right, then let's do the documentary. But we're setting some ground rules." "What rules?" "First, our story will be told completely, including the painful and embarrassing parts. No romanticizing or downplaying what happened. Second, any money we make will be split equally between us and a fund to support other bullying victims. Third, if either of us starts acting like a celebrity or loses focus on the mission, the other has the right to end our partnership." Tyler nodded to each rule. "I agree to all of it. Can I add one?" "What?" "That we always remember we're not heroes. We're just two people who learned some important lessons and want to share them." "Perfect," Emily smiled. "Then let's change some lives." The documentary, From Enemies to Allies, a lesson on bullying and redemption, was released 8 months later and became a national phenomenon. Emily and Tyler's story touched millions, not just students but parents, teachers, and school administrators. They received hundreds of letters from young people inspired by their story. Some were from bullying victims who found the courage to seek help. Others were from bullies who recognized their own behavior and wanted to change. One letter in particular stayed with them. It was from a teacher at a rural school in the countryside. "Dear Emily and Tyler, I'm writing to thank you for the impact you've had on our small school. After watching the documentary, our students started conversations I never thought possible. 2 boys in a situation similar to yours decided to seek help and are now working together on a project to improve the school environment. Most importantly, our community has begun to understand that bullying isn't just kids being kids or a normal part of growing up. It's a serious problem that needs serious solutions. You haven't just changed individual lives, you've helped change an entire culture. Thank you for having the courage to share your story." When Emily finished reading the letter aloud to Tyler, the two sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of the impact they'd had. "Do you think Mr. Jenkins would be proud?" Tyler asked. "I'm sure he would," Emily replied. "He always said Aikido wasn't just about defending yourself, but about promoting harmony and peace wherever we went." "And do you think we've done that?" Emily glanced around the auditorium where they were giving their final presentation before focusing on college entrance exams. Hundreds of young people listened with genuine attention, many taking notes, others discreetly wiping away tears. "I think we're on the right path," she said. 2 years later, Emily and Tyler graduated as class speakers. In their commencement speeches, both reflected on the journey they'd shared and the lessons they'd learned. Tyler spoke about how he'd discovered that true leadership means lifting others up, not tearing them down. Emily spoke about how she'd learned that real strength comes from turning negative experiences into opportunities for growth. After the ceremony, as families gathered for celebrations, Mrs. Johnson approached Tyler. "Young man, I wanted to tell you something," she said in her warm but firm voice. Tyler felt a little nervous. He'd never been entirely sure how Mrs. Johnson truly felt about him, despite all the progress he'd made. "When all this started, I didn't like you one bit," she continued. "I thought you were just a spoiled, cruel boy who was hurting my granddaughter." Tyler nodded, knowing she'd been right in her initial judgment. "But watching your journey these past 2 years, seeing how hard you've worked to change and grow, well, I wanted you to know that I now consider you part of our family." Tears welled in Tyler's eyes. Mrs. Johnson's approval meant more to him than any public recognition he'd received. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. That means everything to me." "And one more thing," she added with a mysterious smile. "You have to promise me you'll keep looking after my granddaughter. Not as protection, she obviously can take care of herself, but as a friend and partner." "I promise," Tyler said solemnly. Emily, who had been watching the whole exchange from a distance, walked over to them. "Are you two conspiring against me?" she teased. "Just making sure you have the support you deserve, my dear," Mrs. Johnson replied, hugging her granddaughter. That night, at the graduation party, Emily and Tyler danced together for the first time. It wasn't a romantic moment. They had become best friends, but their personalities weren't suited for a romantic relationship. Instead, it was a celebration of partnership and mutual growth. "Where do we go from here?" Tyler asked as they danced. "You're studying psychology at Boston University. I'm studying education at the same school. We'll keep doing our work, but at a more professional level," Emily answered. "And do you think our partnership will keep working?" "Tyler, we turned one of the worst experiences of our lives into something that's helped thousands of people. I think we can handle whatever the future brings." 5 years later, Dr. Tyler Williams and Professor Emily Johnson co-founded the American Institute for Bullying Prevention, an organization that became a national leader in education on school bullying and youth conflict mediation. The institute offered training programs for educators, psychological support for victims and aggressors, and research on the causes and consequences of bullying in American society. Emily had specialized in conflict mediation techniques and educational psychology, while Tyler developed expertise in rehabilitating aggressive behaviors and social reintegration programs. Margaret, now 78 years old, still lived with Emily in a larger, more comfortable home they had bought, with part of the resources Emily earned from her work at the Institute. "My dear," she said one afternoon as they had tea together, "have you ever stopped to think how all this began?" "What do you mean, Grandma?" "If you hadn't found the courage to stand up for yourself that day in the locker room, none of this would have happened. Tyler would probably still be a bully, you'd still be a victim, and thousands of young people wouldn't have gotten the help they needed." Emily reflected on her grandmother's words. "I know, Grandma. I don't think it was just the courage to defend myself physically that changed everything. It was the courage to choose compassion over revenge afterward." "How so?" "I could have used my physical victory over Tyler to humiliate him publicly, to seek revenge for all those months of suffering. But Mr. Jenkins taught me that real strength lies in knowing when to stop fighting and start building." Margaret smiled, remembering the elderly man who had made such a profound impact on her granddaughter's life. He would be proud to see what you've become. I hope so, and I hope Mom would be too. Your mother would be overjoyed, my dear. She always dreamed of making a difference in the world, but she left us too soon. You fulfilled her dreams and your own. That night, Emily got a call from Tyler. Emily, have you seen the news about our nomination? What nomination? We've been nominated for the National Peace Education Award. The Institute has been recognized as the organization that has most positively impacted the reduction of school violence in the country. Emily was speechless for a moment. It was recognition she had never imagined receiving. Tyler, that's amazing. But do you know what's even more amazing? What? That we got here together. Despite everything that happened, despite how it all started, we managed to build something truly meaningful. And do you know the most ironic part of all this? Tyler asked. What? If I hadn't been a terrible bully, and if you hadn't been a brave victim, we never would have discovered our ability to work together to solve these problems. That doesn't mean the suffering was worth it, Emily said carefully. It means we managed to turn suffering into something useful. Exactly, and that might be the most important lesson we can teach, that our worst moments don't have to define our lives. They can become the foundation for our best ones. On the day of the award ceremony 3 months later, Emily and Tyler took the stage together to accept the prize. The auditorium was filled with educators, politicians, and activists from across the country. In her acceptance speech, Emily spoke about the importance of not giving up on people, even when they make serious mistakes. Tyler spoke about the possibility of redemption and growth, even in the most difficult circumstances. Together, they dedicated the award to all the bullying victims who found the courage to seek help, and to all the aggressors who chose change over repeating destructive patterns. As they stepped off the stage, they were approached by a journalist who had one final question. After everything you've been through and achieved, what advice would you give to young people facing situations similar to what you experienced? Emily and Tyler exchanged glances before answering. For the victims, Emily said, remember that you're stronger than you think, and asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage. And for the bullies, Tyler continued, remember that it's never too late to choose to be a better person. But the change has to be real, consistent, and come from a genuine desire to grow. And for everyone, Emily concluded, remember that how we respond to conflict defines who we become. We can choose to perpetuate cycles of pain, or we can choose to break them and build something better. When they left the ceremony that night, Tyler made one last remark to Emily. You know, 7 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be here today, receiving a national award alongside the girl I used to bully, I would have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me I'd be standing here next to the boy who caused me so much pain, working together to help others, I would have thought the same thing, Emily laughed. It just goes to show we never really know where life might take us. True, but it also proves we always have choices about the direction we want to take. As they walked through the Washington, D.C. night after the most important ceremony of their careers, Emily and Tyler reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. From enemies to allies, from bully and victim to partners and friends, from troubled teenagers to respected professionals making a difference in the lives of thousands of young people across the country. Their story had proven that people can change, that forgiveness is possible, and that even the most negative experiences can be turned into positive forces when faced with courage, compassion, and determination. And as they looked to the future, both knew their partnership would continue to evolve and grow, always remembering the lessons they had learned in the locker room of a high school in Boston, where it all began. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and transformation. Do you believe Tyler truly changed, or do you think it was just a strategy? How would you react if you were in Emily's place? Would you choose forgiveness or revenge? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think about this journey of redemption. Don't forget to like if the story touched you in any way, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one. Thank you so much for joining us.